Hey, welcome to Hot Movies. Today I am going to recap a 2015 romance drama movie named Natasha. At the start of the film, we are introduced to a boy named Mark. Mark and his buddies are holding a party. Mark then went to meet a girl and asked her to having intercourse. But the girl refused since he was not the type of person she was looking for. Mark left the party silently, feeling offended, and decided to go home. Mark returned home and masturbated while watching porn film on his laptop before falling asleep. The next day, Mark's mother informed him that his uncle will be paying him a visit today. Mark's mother instructed him to prepare for his uncle's arrival. Soon after, Mark's uncle arrived at his residence with his wife Gina. Gina is originally from Russia. They afterwards went for dinner together. Mark's gaze was often drawn to Gina's breasts in the dining room. Mark's mother tells him after dinner that Gina is traveling to Russia today to bring up her daughter. Gina has a 14-year-old daughter, and she is bringing her to Canada to live with her parents. Mark's family was observed picking up Gina at the airport a few days later. Gina arrived shortly after with her daughter Natasha. For the very first time, Mark meets Natasha. Mark's uncle married Gina for the second time a few days later. Everyone gathered at Mark's residence to celebrate the wedding. After the ceremony, There, it felt like Mark was continually looking at Natasha. Mark invited Natasha to his room once the celebration was ended. "What do you do the most in your room?" Natasha inquired of Mark. Mark responded that he frequently spends time in his room, studying and playing video games. "Have you ever brought a female to your room to make love?" Natasha asked. Natasha's question caught Mark off guard. "You're only 14 years old. How can you talk about making love?" remarked Mark. "Don't you feel ashamed about sexual things?" Then Natasha said, "I'm not ashamed of anything sexual, since I've had sex with more than 100 people this far. You can make love to me right now, if you want. Your mother married my uncle, thus you are my cousin," Mark added, even more startled. Natasha smiles and then states that she doesn't care. She claimed that her mother would not care what she did because her mother, like her, was a prostitute who had intercourse with hundreds of people. Mark could only remain mute after hearing that response. Mark's mother requested him to take Natasha for a walk one day, because Natasha had just arrived in Canada for the first time. Natasha doesn't know anything about the place and she doesn't even have any friends. This is why Mark's mother asked Mark to accompany Natasha to Canada. He was, after all, her cousin. Mark arrived to Natasha's residence the next day. Natasha is a teenage girl, as said by Gina. So Gina told Mark to be patient in escorting Natasha, because Natasha was frequently immature and usually getting into mischief. Gina then instructed Natasha to get ready and leave with Mark. Natasha, on the other hand, was upset with her mother and left the room. Mark then pursued Natasha. "Why are you furious with your mother?" Mark asked Natasha. Natasha then told him that she despises her mother. In fact, she despised her. Following that, Mark drove Natasha to the home of a friend named Rufus. Natasha was overjoyed when she went to Rufus' place. Mark informs Natasha that Rufus lives alone at home, because Rufus' parents recently relocated to another city. Following that, Mark and Natasha dined at a restaurant. Mark drove Natasha home. After dinner, Natasha tells Mark that she doesn't need to come to her house because she will come to his house tomorrow. Natasha arrived at Mark's place the next day, while he was studying. They then talked about their personal lives. Then Mark wanted to take Natasha on a bicycle trip. On the street, Mark runs into some of his buddies. Natasha notices Mark doing drug trades with them there. Natasha had just discovered that Mark was in possession of marijuana. Natasha requested Mark to give her marijuana when she arrived home. Natasha was given marijuana by Mark. The two then sat in the room, smoking marijuana. Natasha afterwards asked Mark if she might use her laptop. Natasha opened the laptop to find it still turned on. When the laptop was unlocked, it revealed a pretty explicit porn video. Apparently Mark had been watching the porn movie before Natasha arrived, but he had forgotten to turn it off. Mark was embarrassed and remained silent. Natasha, as it turned out, adored watching the sexual videos. Then Natasha accessed her Facebook profile on his laptop and began presenting naked images of herself to Mark that were both dirty and sexy. Seeing Natasha's sexy images made Mark's penis stand up. "Do you want to have sex with me?" Natasha then asked Mark. Natasha began to undress before Mark could say anything. Natasha then drew her shorts down. They made love in the room after Natasha's underwear slipped off. This was Mark's first time having sex with a girl in his room. With the process of time, the two grew to like each other. Natasha and Mark spend more time together. They make love numerous times a day, without fail. Mark gradually develops feelings for Natasha. Mark's uncle and Gina left town one day. Natasha is forced to remain at Mark's place as a result. Natasha tells Mark that she is really happy with him, and hopes that she can stay with him forever. Natasha was welcome to stay at Mark's residence for as long as she wished. Natasha then informs Mark that her mother has been having an affair. She discovers that her mother is still having affairs with other men. Natasha stated that she had informed Mark's uncle of the situation. He, on the other hand, did not believe her. Gina invited Natasha to accompany her after Uncle Mark and Gina returned from their trip. Natasha, on the other hand, stated that she did not wish to leave. Gina becomes enraged and then claims to know why Natasha refuses to continue. Gina is aware of everything Natasha has done with Mark. Natasha began to argue with her mother after hearing this. Natasha was furious with her mother. Later, Mark's mother and father counseled Natasha extensively, and as a result, Natasha was forced to return home with her mother. Mark arrived to Natasha's residence the next day. Gina informs Mark that what occurred between Mark and Natasha was not his fault. Gina went on to say that Natasha was a pampered brat with poor habits. She had made love to a large number of people, both young and old. Natasha's mother then locked the door and requested Mark to come home. Natasha arrived at Mark's residence one day with all of her possessions. Natasha informs Mark that she is fleeing from home and invites him to join her. When Mark heard this, he remained silent and said nothing. Natasha then revealed that her mother had divorced Mark's uncle. This occurred after Gina discovered Natasha having sex with Mark's uncle. So Gina and Mark's uncle got into a fight, and they eventually divorced. Mark remained silent. Mark then invited Natasha into the room. Natasha is leaving the following day. Mark was heartbroken since he had fallen in love with Natasha. But he couldn't quit thinking about Natasha's actions. Mark sends Natasha some money and leaves a note for her to call him if she needs assistance. Natasha then quietly exited the room. Mark's parents discuss his uncle's divorce at his residence. Gina divorced Mark's uncle for what reason? Mark already knew the truth about what had transpired, but he didn't tell anyone. Rufus contacted him after a few days, but Mark did not answer. Mark paid a visit to Rufus' residence one day. Mark noticed Natasha's presence. Natasha now lives with Rufus, it turns out. Rufus informs Mark that he has attempted numerous times to contact Mark in order to inform him about Natasha, but Mark has not returned his calls. Mark gave Natasha a mournful look. Natasha makes love to her uncle after making love to him. And now, the Natasha he adores has daily sex with his closest buddy Rufus. Mark understands that an affair is nothing to Natasha. Mark returned home with a lot of questions. Natasha just stood there staring at him. Mark was still thinking about Natasha when he got home. And so the film concludes. Thank you so much for watching. Remember to like, subscribe, and enable notifications for more interesting content. See you in the next video.